one thing I noticed that I think was incredible, and this is where it gets to me so obvious sometimes. There was a local coverage, and I posted it on Facebook. I don't know if John saw it or not, but it was a 15-second clip of a local newscaster, a blonde-haired woman, who basically was reporting the El Paso shooting before it happened.
Happened at the Walmart in Horizon. I'm not sure what time this tweet went out, however, okay, here it is, at 3 p.m. Well, that hasn't happened yet. Okay, so today is the 3rd.
This is 30.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report. Thanks so much for tuning in. I want to let you know that this interview with Donald Jeffries and John Barbour was recorded before Jeffrey Epstein supposedly killed himself. Of course, then the Jeffrey Epstein news took me a bit off track, but this interview is still extremely pertinent, and we cover many important topics. A special thanks to my patrons who are keeping us in the game as YouTube continues to demonetize every single video and interview I post. And also a special thanks to this video's sponsor, Virtual Shield. You know, if you're not using a VPN by now on your desktop, tablet, or mobile device when you browse the internet, you're really exposing yourself to danger, guys. At some point, you have to get a VPN. But what is a VPN? It's a virtual private network that allows you to create a secure connection to another network over the internet. Check it out. I'll show you how this works. You can see me here on my website, thelibertymill.com. I've already installed Virtual Shield. I just go up to this little icon, the shield up there in the upper right-hand corner. I click it, and then I connect to Virtual Shield. And now you can see that my IP address says that it's coming from Chicago, Illinois. I don't live anywhere near Illinois. So that's how a VPN works. Very simple to do. Go to virtualshield.com and download the free 30-day trial and install it, then just click connect like I just showed you. This month, Virtual Shield is offering a back-to-school celebration special of 20% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons, including Protection Plus, residential access, monthly maintenance, phone support, and VIP performance plans for as low as $3 a month. So sign up for your free 30-day trial. Protect your personal data now with a VPN. Try Virtual Shield. I'll leave the link below this video. Hey friends, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic to have you back. I hope everyone is having a wonderful summer. I cannot believe it's already practically the middle of August. I don't have an agenda for this call today, and that's why it's going to be a fun one. I have on the line right now John Barbour. His book, Your Mother's Not a Virgin, The Bumpy Life and Times of the Canadian Dropout Who Changed the Face of American TV, and, of course, our friend Donald Jeffries, his latest book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, The History They Didn't Teach You in School, featuring a foreword written by somebody you might know. His name's Ron Paul, and that's pretty cool. Donald, first you, welcome. How are you?
Fine, thanks for having, Sean. It's always great being on your show.
Well, it's great to have you back. And a little inside baseball for folks listening. This is take two, because last week we tried to do this and our internet connection was so bad. Every other word kept dropping and we finally had to throw in the towel. So John Barbour, welcome back.
Oh, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be back. I love talking to you and, of course, Donald Jeffries, who better than Ron Paul did the foreword to my book. And so since Once Upon a Time in America, there was a lot of politeness, which seems to be vanishing like civility. As a matter of fact, romance is gone too. I get a lot of notes from people, men and women, that say romance is gone. They can't find anybody to fall in love with. They're just looking for somebody to fall in like with. But since there was politeness in this country, and one of the things that Americans used to say was always age before beauty. So since in this trio, I'm the one that qualifies for age before beauty, I would like to start this off by talking about the media, since you reminded me of it, since you brought up the business of the NFL. One of the things that I absolutely love about the Bible, probably my most favorite quote, is, "This too shall pass." And what the Bible is talking about is bad news, because those ancient Hebrews knew that more bad news was coming along anyway. So this all was going to pass, and we've seen that in high evidence this past week. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about the media and then its reaction to the two mass shootings that we've just been heir to in the United States in El Paso and in sadly, and in Dayton. So my first impressions are this. It happened on a Saturday, and I saw that El Paso was, oh my God, it was shocking. And so I tune into CNN and I tune into MSNBC, and I go back and forth. But guess what happens? It's 18 people are supposedly shot. And it's totally, absolutely brutal and horrifying. And guess what happens? Instead of continuing the investigation, these two networks, they go to commercials. It was so offensive to see them selling plastic junk and medical junk and absolute total junk to happy, smiling faces. I was so upset, I turned it off, because what it was unfettered, greedy capitalism at its absolute worst, selling this trash over dead bodies. This happened on a Saturday. On Sunday, I was trying to forget the horror and watching the fourth round of golf. It's the last month of PGA golf in America, and they're playing for millions of dollars. And being a golf junkie, I watched it on the fourth day, which is the last day. And it was on NBC. And guess what, Sean? 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, NBC interrupts the golf to say we have an update on the news. So, of course, I think it is going to be about El Paso and about Dayton. And guess what it was about? They didn't mention it at all. It was an update on football. I mean, have we become that degenerate? The other thing that really upset me, and upset me a lot, was I could not believe that the mainstream media was so cruel and so thoughtless in what they did just 2 days after these mass shootings. They kept playing a clip of Donald Trump from his rally the day before, in which he shouted, and he was shouting the statistics about the number of rapes and murders that these Mexicans and these immigrants commit, which may be true, because I doubt that he's lying about the statistics. But what was so offensive to me was the fact that it looked like what they were doing was they were trying to denigrate the President of the United States by showing how insensitive he was. Instead, they should have held this off just so people could sort of recover from the horrors of what happened in El Paso and what happened in Dayton.
Well, John, let me jump in, because I think you've given us a lot to unpack here, and I actually didn't know we were going to talk about El Paso or the Ohio shootings, but I'm glad you brought it up, and I want to get Donald Jeffries' thoughts on this, because Donald, I don't know if you were watching that coverage live like I was. I tweeted out on the day of the Walmart shooting, I told everybody, record the Mockingbird mainstream media news, because the truth will be told in the first 24 hours, and the official story will roll out afterward. And all of the eyewitness testimony about multiple shooters and all of the holes in the story will be forgotten by the mainstream Mockingbirds. Have you noticed, Donald, that on day one, they were showing us a picture of the suspect, and on day 3, that picture changed? They're showing us, they say one shooter, but they're showing 2 different pictures.
You're absolutely right.
And Donald, I want your thoughts on the El Paso shooting. I didn't know we'd talk about it, but you're an expert on this stuff, crimes and cover-ups in American politics. This is what they do to us time and time and time again. The official story always changes and solidifies after the first 24 hours.
Absolutely. Well, you guys are better than me if you can watch any live coverage of news. I really can't do it. I kind of gave up that a long time ago. But I do keep on top of this, going to certain conspiracy type forums. I look at things that people post on Facebook that are of interest to me, because a lot of my friends are like-minded. And I was struck by several things. I try not to go down these rabbit holes too much, because they are rabbit holes, and they really make you start questioning everything. But if you look at any of these incidents, there are always so many holes in the official narratives, whether it's, almost all of them, these going back to Parkland, you have witnesses who report multiple shooters and things like that. You have the same kind of witnesses that appear to be less than credible in my eyes. And in this case, you had Beto O'Rourke, who was trying to, like so many of these Democratic candidates, trying to jumpstart a campaign that's lagging by putting on. He reminded a lot of us of Robbie Parker from Sandy Hook fame, if you remember. Where he kind of was caught laughing, and this is a father who had just lost a child, laughing and smiling, and then he suddenly like went on script and instantly, before he went to a press conference, and unfortunately they caught the whole thing, and he was criticized a lot for that. In this case, Beto O'Rourke appeared to do almost the exact same thing. He was laughing and smiling, almost laughing, but smiling certainly inappropriately when he was trying to stoke, basically, lobby for gun control, which seems to be the main thrust of all these candidates. We must take your guns away. But one thing I noticed that I think was incredible, and this is where it gets to me so obvious sometimes. There was a local coverage, and I posted it on Facebook. I don't know if John saw it or not, but it was a 15-second clip of a local newscaster, a blonde-haired woman, who basically was reporting the El Paso shooting before it happened. Shades of 9/11 and Building 7. And you had to see it to believe it, because she says, oh, that hasn't happened yet.
Happened at the Walmart in Horizon. I'm not sure what time this tweet went out. However, here it is, at 3 p.m. Well, that hasn't happened yet. Okay, so today is the 3rd.
This is 30.
I mean, so, again, you go down the rabbit hole and you think, and of course they call you crazy if you do that. And what you really see the impact that the censorship has had on YouTube, especially, because in the past with these incidents, going back to Gabby Giffords and Aurora and Sandy Hook, and certainly the gay nightclub, Parkland, all these things, you could go to YouTube and you could find fantastic, often really sophisticated, slick video presentations put together by amateur, real investigative journalists, the people that are doing the work that our state-controlled journalists never do. They don't investigate anything. They can't investigate a used car salesman. But they would dissect these events, and I actually tried to find some on YouTube, and it's just not there now. YouTube instantly directs you to mainstream sources, Fox News, CBS.
Well, Donald, one of the general managers of the lead station in El Paso said that this kid's manifesto was not uploaded by this kid. It was uploaded by somebody else.
That was the owner of 8chan, actually. That's on the record. So the owner of 8chan said that this manifesto was not uploaded by the alleged shooter. So that's very, very important. And some of the people that have gone through, some of the experts that have gone through that manifesto say that the style in which it's written appears to show the hands of at least 3 or 4 different people. So this whole thing appears to be crafted. And I just want to get, John, I want your thoughts on this. Well, as it pertains to Walmart and the hundreds of cameras within a Walmart, and the cameras in the parking lot, and the cameras on the traffic control lights, they're telling us that this young person walked into a Walmart. By the way, they're showing us the images of 2 different people. They say one shooter.
Yes.
And he walked into the Walmart. Well, first he walked into the mall, evidently. And then he walked into the Walmart, shot the place up. Police were called, somehow magically got back out into the parking lot, into his car, and was apprehended really without incident half a mile away from the Walmart in the middle of the street. Okay, fine. If that's the official story, great. I'm happy to swallow it. Show me the video. Show me the money, as Jerry Maguire would say.
I'm glad you bring that up, because they had a different picture in Walmart. They have a different picture outside. But the thing that astonished me the most is, how come he's the only mass shooter who was never shot? I mean, the guy in Dayton was gunned down almost immediately. How this guy wasn't shot? And I'm glad you brought up the manifesto, because this is just my instinctive reaction. I have no proof about it. But the people I know who write manifestos, people who are nuts about being against something, they write in it every day. It seemed that this kid just wrote the night before he went out to El Paso. And it reminded me so much of supposedly the manifesto that Sirhan wrote the night before he did not shoot Robert Kennedy, that RFK must die. I mean, he's a Palestinian kid who probably never wrote at all. And if he did, it would be there every day. And when I say he did not shoot RFK, there was proof of that in the autopsy done by Thomas Noguchi, my friend. What he was firing was blanks, because they didn't want him to kill the 2 shooters who murdered Bobby Kennedy from behind. So That's my take on that. So I'm entirely suspicious all the time about anything the government tells me about these mass shootings. And I hate to feel that way, because I should feel sad for the victims instead of being so enraged at my government and the media.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Donald, you can jump in there, but I tell you where my anger comes in is watching these press conferences with the police in the days after, where the journalists, quote unquote, don't ask any questions. They don't. They literally say, "How are you feeling? How is the SWAT team feeling after having to encounter such gruesomeness? You know, how is I mean, they gloss over all of the important questions by not asking them, and it's absolutely enraging to me.
No, what a fabulous point you bring up, because I have said for years and years, for a democracy to function properly in America, it's not necessary for those leaders of our country or those leaders in our media to answer questions.
Yeah, John.
Important that there's somebody there to ask them, and they're not asking them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and there was a subtext to all my writing. Whether it's Hidden History, the new book especially, it's that we don't have a free press. Obviously, we all ought to know that by now. But it's laughable to call them investigative journalists, because they don't investigate it. And you described perfectly the kind of press conferences you see. And that's why the coverage of Donald Trump has been so over the top different than anything we've seen before, because these journalists, it's not like they were hard on George W. Bush or anything. They've been hard on anyone before Trump. So this is something they've been conditioned to do. They lob softballs at politicians, and they don't even question these narratives at all. And it goes back to a local reporter here I emailed after Sandy Hook, where I just asked her, because she was the one who interviewed the school nurse there, who was describing in detail about how Adam Lanza's mother was a much beloved kindergarten teacher at the school, and how everybody in the school knew little Adam. And of course, that turned out to be, as the narrative changed, it was that no, actually, the mother had no connection to the school and wasn't a teacher there. So I emailed her and I said, just wonder what you thought of that. Did you go back and try to interview the nurse? And she caught exactly what I was saying, because they can, they have a spidey sense. They can detect when there's, oh, this is a conspiracy, because he's asking questions. And she said there was no conspiracy. There was a response. And it's like, what kind of journalist are you? There's no Lois Lane instinct there at all to go back.
Donald, you brought up George Bush and the softballs, and that brings up something that was really important. Is last week, the Central Intelligence Agency announced that their investigation about the war in Iraq is over. And there is absolute and total proof there was no reason for that war, because there were no weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. No one brought up the fact that why isn't somebody now going to George Bush or Condoleezza Rice or Powell or Cheney and questioning them about that CIA report? Not one single word or one single question.
They don't question anything. It's now, it's basically acknowledged that the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag, but no one questions why it was. No, I mean, in my new book, I go back when this really started in America, which was 1898, and the Spanish-American War, when it was remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. And they've acknowledged, even the court historians acknowledged, okay, yeah, that was a false flag. Now they acknowledge that. They acknowledge in World War I the sinking of Lusitania was another false flag. I mean, the historians don't even argue it anymore. Now
in World War II, they could have bombed every one of those railroad tracks leading to all those concentration camps, but they never bombed a one. But here, if we have reporters that are now getting dumb and dumber, we have citizens that are getting dumb and dumber. This story came out last week. My best friend in Las Vegas is George Knapp, who was one of the best investigative journalists in the country. He is a very successful Sunday night host of Coast to Coast, reporting, replacing the very inept George Noory. And it's George Knapp who literally saved the Garrison tapes from oblivion 10 years ago. He has a friend. And as a joke, a friend put up a post about 6 weeks ago that he was looking for fellow patriots to join him in storming Area 51 here in Nevada. And everybody knows that Area 51 is one of the most highly guarded secret outposts and bases in the United States. And guess what? He got 4 million people, 4 million fellow volunteer stormtroopers to join him. Now the guy's stuck and didn't know what to do. So I sent a note to George 2 days ago, and I said, listen, you should have this guy get rich by selling these 4 million people a map to Area 51 to show them where it is and where they'll begin. But the most terrifying thing about all of this, Sean and Donald, is that these 4 million people vote.
Yeah, that's right. One man, one vote. But it's, it's so when we hear any of these things, it's studying history as I have going back. I think Americans definitely have gotten dumber than they were in the past, but they weren't. The majority wasn't all that bright back in the past either. And certainly, one of the false flags that is still defended, I write a great deal about Pearl Harbor. And I think there's no question now that is the Pulitzer Prize winning, and this was what happens to a journalist that suddenly decides to report the truth. It's instructive to look at what happened to John Toland. John Toland was a Pulitzer Prize winning court historian in good standing. His biography of Adolf Hitler and things that were published by major publishers. He got New York Times Book Review and all that. But he made the mistake of writing a book called Infamy in the early 1980s, in which he dissected the foreknowledge Franklin Roosevelt and the administration had of the Japanese attack, and how they basically waved them in because they were so desperate to get into World War II. Well, because of that, he was drummed out of the court historian community. He was instantly called a Nazi, which is absolutely ridiculous when he was talking about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which had nothing to do with Nazis. But that was even then, that was the term the court historians threw at him. And he ended up spending his remaining years, he lived to be pretty old. It was really pathetic. The only place that would have him was the old Institute for Historical Review conferences with revisionists and Holocaust deniers. That's the only place that would let him speak, because and this is a Pulitzer Prize winner. He just simply told the truth about an event that he wasn't allowed to tell the truth about in our so-called free press.
Let me just jump in and say, in defense of dumb people in the country, it's hard to be smart when you're constantly being bathed in lies. And Donald, that in 2012, under Obama's watch, they dismantled the Smith-Lunt Act, which allows the government now to use propaganda domestically against its own people. Well, what's propaganda? It's a lie. It's misinformation. It's disinformation. So if we're constantly bathed in lies by a government that says that's perfectly legal, not only is our republic hopelessly lost and mired in this deep state of lies, the people can't get smart. And then when people do wise up and they turn to the alternative media, to your point, Donald, when you go on YouTube and you search for SGT report and you want to find out about these past false flags, even when you search for my videos that I produced on a lot of these topics, you're going to have a hard time finding them. And that's the problem. So we're winning the battle in the public square. So now the deep state, the Democrats, and their whore media are all in bed together to continue to bury the truth and lie to the people. And that's the most disgusting part. So in defense of dumb people, those of us who have wised up are now still being bathed in lies because they've turned the whole apparatus against us, and they're trying to kill the alternative news media. They're trying to kill truth. To these people, truth is terror.
Yeah, it's probably better to say unknowledgeable people or ignorant, because there is a difference, obviously, between that. And you're right. You're only subject to what you've been brainwashed with. I mean, people say they're informed, but I mean, anybody who watches. I mean, sometimes the only time I watch like a CNN or something, to me, that's CNN should be with Don Lemon and the Chris Cuomo especially. I would pipe that in. If you are a supporter of torture, I can't think of anything greater than to pipe that in and make prisoners watch that, because that is unbearable. And the only time I have ever had to tolerate is if I'm at a car dealership or something, and they have a TV on in the background. I try to walk away from it, but it's like a car wreck. You train wreck, you keep coming back. But it is, what I'm astonished at is, I mean, going back to even Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, and John and I know from the JFK assassination that they were lying then too, but they were slicker about it. And it wasn't dumbed down to the level of fluffery it is now. I was watching when I was getting a haircut a couple weeks ago. They had, again, I couldn't get away from it, one of those awful morning shows on that Jenna Bush, who is, George Bush, and I have never seen, she beats anybody I've ever seen. The level of sheer vapidity, I guess you'd call it. I mean, she was so, I don't even know if you could call it an airhead. I could not believe that this woman is some kind of journalist, and she was trying to talk about her cat or something. But this is what the level it's at. It's dumbed down to where, especially the women that might be home watching it, I mean, it's like eating the worst kind of candy for your brain. It's empty calories for your intellect. And to watch this stuff and to know that somebody like Jenna Bush and I'm sure Chelsea Clinton would, probably serve the same purpose, but, and I think has, but Jenna Bush, I sat there and I said, I cannot believe this, because as bad as the Walter Cronkites and Dan Rathers, at least they seemed like journalists. We know they weren't, because they were lying, but they were much better at lying.
Well, Donald and Sean.
Hey guys, Sean here. Zoom crashed on us at this point in the conversation, so bear with us. We'll just pick it up here where we began recording again. So John, as it pertains to big social media, that didn't exist when you were a young man, when you were a star on television, literally. That didn't exist. There was no Google. There was no YouTube. There was no internet. There was no Snapchat, Twitter, YouTube. None of it existed. And now, not only does it exist, it's stealing eyeballs away from the legacy media by droves. I mean, literally, CNN is dying. It's withering on the vine.
They are all dying. And of course, Donald brought up something really interesting, is that the best investigative journalists now are on the internet. And a lot of them are taking their phones as cameras and going out and doing absolutely brilliant stories. Do you know that the best movie ever made about anybody in show business is a movie called Searching for Sugarman? I don't know if you're familiar with it or you've ever seen it, but you must Google it. It's a brilliant story. It was shot by a young European on his phone. And it's a movie that won an Academy Award. The technology has also changed. And look at the success. I mean, your success even on the internet. And we don't even know what you look like, and you're still here. Okay.
Yeah, one of my claims to fame is just keeping my image off of Google. Do a Google search. You're going to have a hard time finding it. And I kind of like that. I like it because you know what? I never got into this to be famous. If I did, I would. My face would be front and center on everything I do. But I didn't get into it to be famous. Right? I don't get paid $12 million a year to lie like Anderson Cooper, who's become a star, who can host the New Year's Eve ball drop in New York City. So is he a journalist or is he an entertainer? I don't even know anymore. And the point is that it doesn't matter. CNN doesn't care. They don't care about telling people the truth. They don't care about news. That's why none of the real questions are being asked. And to Donald's point, well, actually, and to your point, John, all they're doing with the coverage of the El Paso shooting and the Ohio shooting is trying to pin it on Trump and Trump supporters without ever telling the truth that I think the Ohio shooter was actually a hardcore Democrat communist who believes in Satanism and all sorts of other nonsense.
Yeah, and I brought the point in social media over and over again is that why, if again, you have to be consistent here, and today's left is obviously not consistent. If a supporter of Donald Trump, as the El Paso guy allegedly was, an anti-immigrant guy, if this alleged shooter, if his alleged motives can be blamed on Donald Trump and white supremacy, whatever that is, then why can't the alleged Ohio shooter's alleged motives be blamed on Elizabeth Warren? He apparently was Elizabeth Warren's supporter, and Antifa. He was apparently an Antifa supporter. But it never goes that way. The guy who shot up the Republicans playing softball a couple years ago, nobody even knows his name.
Oh, Steve Scalise, you're right. The target of an assassination, Steve Scalise, the guy who did a PSA about the plague of child sex trafficking in this country. In big cities around the nation, he makes a PSA talking about pedophilia and child trafficking, and then he gets shot up, nearly assassanated. Thank God he didn't. It didn't succeed at a softball game. But you're right.
And by a Bernie Sanders supporter, and was Bernie Sanders grilled by our press and said, how do you disown this? It's stupid stuff like that. I mean, the media is.
And Zoom crashed again. So we'll pick it up here the best we can. Here's Don and John. You were on quite a rant about the media and Bernie.
Yeah. Well, it's just consistency, and I think it's the same thing you're seeing here, where they determine. I mean, this goes back to the Unabomber. The Unabomber, if I recall correctly, was kind of an environmental wacko type extremist. I think he loved Al Gore. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but no one thinks of him that way, because his political beliefs weren't associated with his actions. That only happens when they can go after someone and try to attribute it to white nationalism, whatever that means, white supremacy, whatever that means. These are just code words that are thrown. And that's why one thing I really hate is the code word of the left that's used all the time is hate. And I hate it. Hate is a human emotion. We all do it. But they're trying to criminalize hate, but it's a particular kind of hate. So if these two shooters, for instance, if you accept these stories at face value, and both these things happened the way they said they did, by lone nuts that were motivated by some kind of hatred, well, the Ohio shooter is not going to be considered a hater, because people who support Elizabeth Warren and Antifa aren't haters. But the El Paso guy is a die-hard in the wool. He's a textbook example of hatred, because he supports Donald Trump. He's a white supremacist. He was against immigration. So and that's why I was really distressed to hear Donald Trump use that code word and talk about hate. That's just playing down to their level. And I hate to see it, because this is, hatred is because once you talk about hate crimes are like hate speech. They're incompatible with a free society. You can't have free speech if you claim something is hate speech, because hate is in the eye of the beholder. And that's what I wish everyone. I just want to see some consistency out of there. And this correlates also to what we saw earlier, within the last few years with Trump derangement syndrome, where the same people that fought for the civil rights movement, which was primarily, almost to begin with, about certain people not being allowed to eat in certain establishments. Now, but we all recognize.
Donald, excuse me, I hate to interrupt you, but if you're going to have a First Amendment, hate speech should be allowed. Yeah. Remember, Father Coughlin in the Semitic had a very popular radio show. You should be allowed. For example, I've said this 1,000 times. When John Kennedy was president of the United States, there were 1,500 different owners of media in this country. So all kinds of thoughts and philosophies were out there for people to digest on their own. But the worst president in American history, Bill Clinton, reduced it now, turned 95% of that media over to 6 corporations. But the only hate speech that should be disallowed is any speech that calls for the harm of any human being.
Well, that's 100% right, John. I mean, speech is speech. There's no such thing as hate speech. It's just speech. And what they're trying to do is create protected categories and groups of people that cannot be criticized, or you'll be charged with a crime, which is what they have successfully done now in your home country, Canada. They have criminalized certain types of speech. And once they criminalize speech, it's game over for human sovereignty. It's Big Brother Orwell on steroids, and they're getting away with it, sadly, in Canada. We cannot allow them to get away with it here in the United States, where we have a Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and a First Amendment.
Well, when I was writing my recent book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776, 1963, I learned something, even from my research. When I was researching the World War I era, I discovered that the expression now we come to commonly accept, you can't yell, you have free speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, I didn't know where that originated. It originated in the World War I era by one of the great liberals, a eugenicist and an authoritarian warmonger, but he's considered a great liberal, establishment liberal, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In his ruling, which upheld Woodrow Wilson's jailing of socialist Eugene Debs and lots of other World War I protesters, he used that expression. Well, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, as if protesting a war equated to that. And that's why even that kind of abridgment is dangerous, because you see what it was originally used for, to keep war protesters in jail.
Yeah.
And that's why any kind of abridgment of free speech is so dangerous. I'm a free speech purist, and up until 1917 or whatever that decision was made, no one in America thought that, well, we have to put some kind of a caveat on free speech. Free speech means nothing if it, as John talked about, hate speech. I don't like to categorize anything as hate speech, but the speech that you as an individual may hate, you have to support that because you don't want your own speech abridged. So as Patrick Henry said, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to my dying day your right to say it. We used to be taught that in school.
Donald, you have to have a place to say it. And there's no place to say it anymore. When I was in, John brought this up, when I was in television in the early years, you could say it, almost say it, because there was a fairness doctrine. And there was free speech. But all of that was shut down when Jim Garrison sued NBC and the Federal Communications Commission because NBC illegally sent Walter Sheridan to try to sabotage his investigation into the murder of John Kennedy by bribing Perry Raymond Russo to get him out of New Orleans. So Garrison was given equal time. And when he was on television speaking, as Sean points out, the absolute truth, the owners of the country, and the people are not the owners of the country, the families that own the country said, we cannot have this kind of truth anymore on television. And they got rid of the fairness doctrine. Because when I had Ronald Reagan on the show, I then had to have a Democrat, then I had to have a socialist. And you could have not had people like Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh because you would have had to have people on the other side. It was Thomas Jefferson who said you cannot have a functioning democracy unless you have an informed electorate. We do not have that. And also, John Kennedy said one of the things that I think is most important, which closes my documentary, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. John Kennedy says, those people who do not allow a peaceful revolution invite a real revolution. And that is so true. Now you look at these manifestos that the El Paso shooters do, and we bring up gun control. You want to see rapid gun control in this country? And I do not understand this. It seems that every wacko goes into a church or a dance hall or a Walmart and shoots down people like us. What would happen if somebody followed what John Kennedy was saying and thought we got to get rid of people at the top who are preventing the change? Now, I'm not encouraging this, I'm just stating this, and blow away a few of those people. I assure you, we would have sensible gun control before they zipped up the body bags.
Well, I mean, I for a long time wondered, when we have people that, this is a little different than going postal, obviously, but it's kind of going postal on steroids when you have these mass shootings. Again, if we accept the legitimacy of the way these are portrayed, but you would think if someone wants to make a political statement, for instance, if this guy was really against immigration, Hispanics, you think he might have shot up La Raza headquarters, or he might have gone to, some of the politicians that have supported open borders. And again, I'm not advocating this at all, but it seems to me that if you want to make a political statement, I don't know what purpose it serves to shoot random Walmart shoppers, but what purpose does it serve if someone goes postal at his job? If he's shot, why does he never go after upper management? It's always his fellow workers. I've never understood that. I mean, I don't know if that's just a product of a mind that's not thinking rationally, but it does make you wonder, because obviously I think these things would be looked at a little differently. I don't know if it would be mass calls for gun control, because most of us don't think that's the answer. And as I've said, I'm starting a new campaign. I want to ban all guns, and that includes the police and the military. That stops the debate right there.
Good luck. Good luck with that one. Yeah. Because you know what the left wants? The left wants the guns taken from the people so that they can carry out their ultimate agenda, which is really, I'm telling you, folks, it's, people living, it's a boot stomping on the face of humanity. That's what they want. That's what we get from the left.
The Germans did that, but they were not left. Fascism is not left. Fascism is corporations siding with the government to control the country. But I mentioned this to Donald the other day. Do you remember that wonderful, wonderful film and play called Inherit the Wind?
Mm-hmm.
You remember that, Sean? Frederick March and Spencer Tracy starred in the film. It was about the Scopes Monkey trial, a trial that was lost, by the way, by Clarence Darrow. But do you remember Ken Lay and Enron?
Sure.
Well, you know what? This is what I proposed, and I started to write about 10 years ago, is that Ken Lay deliberately bankrupted Enron, became a mega millionaire, and there was no retaliation against him. But you know what was not reported? About 18 people who lost their pension plans committed suicide. And what I wrote, I tried to do an imitation of Inherit the Wind. I wrote a story about a young man whose father had committed suicide because he lost his pension and his livelihood because of Ken Lay's acts and because of the support he got from George Bush. And what I did is I had the son go out and murder Ken Lay and surrender, calling it justifiable homicide. And in front of the court and in the jury, that's what his attorney argues, and argues very intelligently. And the play ended with the jury foreman standing and the judge saying, "Have you reached a verdict?" And the jury foreman says, "Yes, we have." And the curtain closes. And so then it's up to the audience sitting watching this play and listening to it to decide whether or not the murder of Ken Lay by this young man is justifiable homicide. These are issues that Donald brings up and you bring up that are never, ever talked about on the media. And that is the actions of the people who run and control this country. And they're in corporate hands. They're not in the people's hands.
Well, and as you know, my personal situation is the victim of one of the most unfair job terminations ever last year, where I worked for a company my entire life, my entire work life, and I was fired without warning for helping out a handicapped employee. It's a true story. And I can't get anywhere with it. But someone like me, luckily, I was able, because they had ended my pension a few years before, so I took a lump sum, so I got something. But if I had been fired, I was subject to losing my pension after working a lifetime there. So, and there are lots of other people out there like that are laid off. They lose everything and they're replaced by foreign visa workers or young kids making half their salary. This is happening all over America. It's what I wrote about in Survival of the Richest. I can understand, having experienced myself. Luckily I'm reasonable enough not to do that, and I'm not violent. But I can understand why, if someone has worked an entire lifetime for a company and they're just dismissed, especially if they end up losing their pension, everything they've worked for. So what are they going to retire on? The little pittance that Social Security is? I can empathize with someone who decides, well, I'm going to take somebody out with me, and but not their coworkers, but if someone in that and I'm really shocked that it hasn't been happening with all the layoffs and outsourcing that's been going on for decades now. I'm shocked that you have not heard, to my knowledge, one example of a disgruntled employee or employees that went after a CEO or upper management. And I think that's kind of a testament maybe to, I don't know, maybe either that they somehow they don't lose their sanity, or maybe kind of the inherent submissive nature, I think, of too many American people now. Why I think we can never depend on Americans going out and getting their yellow jackets like you see has happened in France.
They have become too submissive. That's all.
Well, I think it also speaks to the fact that people are inherently good. I mean, most people are inherently good, and they would never stoop to murdering anybody, no matter how badly they've been wronged. And that speaks, I think, to the positivity of our own human natures. And that's why the deep state fabricates and creates these mass events that have people living in fear, believing that the next mass shooting is always right around the corner, and the mainstream media is always reluctant or unable or incapable or unwilling to shine the light of truth on these events, because They just want people to buy the story, and the story is never a good one as it pertains to our Constitution and our liberties and our Bill of Rights. Guys, we do have to wrap this up at this point, and I want to thank you both for your time. John, do you want to tell people how they can find you on a daily basis?
Oh, well, not necessarily on a daily basis, but if they go to www.johnbarbersworld.com, they can see the first Garrison tapes free. There'll be a link to the Amazon. The second one, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, is an absolute runaway hit and has more and more listeners and buyers thanks to you. And then also there is a link to the book. And I must tell you quite honestly, it is by far the best book ever written about anybody in show business. And I must tell you, it doesn't happen. It happens accidentally, because telling the story of my life, you see the background story of what has happened to the American media, American politics, and the culture just watching my life and listening to the unbelievably entertaining and informative stories about all of the stars that I run into. But more importantly, this book is for somebody who has heard, no, 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 you can't do this too many times. There is nobody on this planet who from the ages of 8 to 80 heard so often, no, John, you cannot do this, but in spite of this, succeeded beyond my wildest dreams because there was divine intervention in my life. The book is called Your Mother's Not a Virgin, The Bumpy Life and Times of the Canadian Dropout Who Changed the Face of American Television. And Sean, I can't thank you enough for being on your show, and especially being on with Donald, who wrote an absolutely brilliant introduction to my book. Thanks to the both of you.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Donald, tell people how they can find your work as well, please.
Oh, I blog regularly. It's Keeping It Unreal after my 2007 novel, The Unreals. It's donaldjeffries.wordpress.com. It's easy to find. I have a YouTube channel that has probably 500 and some thousand subscribers less than you do, so I definitely need subscribers out there. And I have a weekly radio show, I Protest. It airs on the iHeartRadio network. Had some good guests there, and Sean has been kind enough to share some of my videos there. And the new book is called Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963. To my great delight and honor, Ron Paul wrote the foreword, and I think it's important for readers to read this book and see how we arrived at the position, as Oliver Stone quoted from Shakespeare in the film JFK, the past is prologue. And we didn't get it where we are accidentally. We got that way because our leaders have been making disastrous decisions and doing corrupt things for a very long time.
Your excellent book shows that it was inevitable.
Well, there you have it. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I very much appreciate it. Well, that's it, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know how much we appreciate it. And a special thanks to those of you who downloaded the Brave browser. It's more than twice as fast as Google Chrome and Safari. And unlike Google Chrome, Brave will never spy on you. It's also got a built-in ad blocker. So I'll leave the link below this video. If you have downloaded it but never installed it in your computer, just download it again. It takes about 10 seconds. Then make sure you install it on your computer, launch it, and use it. You'll be really glad you did. Take a bite out of Google. Use the Brave browser. And for real news 24/7, you can visit us at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless, guys. Bye-bye.
I'm here to tell you that socialism leads to desperation. It leads to indignities. It leads to hunger. And it leads to death.